Hey there, my name is Michelle Brogan, and welcome to the Under the Influence podcast. I'm so thankful you are joining this journey with me as we hear real stories of how to make real impact. I pray as you listen to this that you will be pushed into kingdom momentum to fulfill all that God has called you to do. Thank you for taking the journey with me.
Well, hey, friends, here we are. First podcast. I can't honestly believe I'm doing this. I mean, I'm not a big podcast listener, but I will say that when I hear God ask me to do something, that's one thing I'm always going to do, and that's going to be obey. And so we're here to journey together. I mean, Under the Influence podcast. And some of you are like, what in the world title is that? I have had this title in my spirit. I thought it was a book a long time ago, but I've had this title in me for so long because really, when you look at someone's life and you look at the trajectory of their life, you know what they're under the influence of. And we're going to make some choices together. We're going to see the things that we have been under the influence of and make sure we're under the influence of the right things that intoxicate us. Because that's the first thing you think of when you hear that is under the influence. Okay, that's like a DUI, like that's something like being drunk. No, I want to be intoxicated by him. That everything that I do, everything I choose, everything that makes me move in a certain direction is because I'm under the influence of the right person, and his name is Jesus. But I hope as we journey together and I tell my testimony and I share things with you, that there's been times in my life that I have not been under the right influence, and it has totally steered me in the wrong direction. And so that's what I'm here for. I'm going to be by myself talking sometimes. I'm going to have guests. I'm going to have my family. Maybe I might even have you on here. You can go actually on my website and you can actually apply to be a guest on the show because I want to hear real stories and I want you to hear real stories as well. And that's why I believe God's asked me to do this, because I'm not trying to get on here and be polished and perfect and try and come up and be a brand of something. I'm just here to see people set free. So today, I'm going to start with just sharing a little bit about myself so we can get to know each other. I want to just tell you a little bit about how God has set me free, how he has changed my life, how he has changed the trajectory of my life. And I hope through my testimony that it's going to touch somebody out there, because really I'm doing this because if it touches one person, I know one person can change the world. That's what Jesus did. He changed the world. And there's people in the Bible that we're still talking about through their stories that are still changing us through their testimony. So that's why I believe whoever's hearing this, I pray that you hear, you see, you understand, you hear something different, you see something different from his perspective, and that we get to do this together and journey into the incredible adventures he has for us. So welcome. So anyway, my name again is Michelle Brogan, and I just want to tell you a little bit about my background and my story. And so I grew up in a home that was a Christian home, and I was an only child. I don't have any brothers or sisters, and I'm so glad I get to do what I do now because I feel like I've met all my brothers and sisters that God has let me journey and adventure with. But I was an only child, and I love my mom and dad so much, and my mom's given me permission to tell my story and my testimony all over the country. And my dad is no longer alive, but I honor him and I love him, and he's such a huge part of my story. And so I hope he knows that even my love for him does not change, but my story has so much to do with some of the brokenness that I have experienced in my journey as a child, as a teenager, and as a young adult. But so I was an only child, and my mom and dad, they started off very early, taking me to church, putting me in Christian school, and I'm so grateful and thankful for that. But at a very early age, my dad, I didn't know how old my dad was. I was told he was a certain age, but when I was on a plane with my parents, they love to travel, and we were traveling to Australia, and that's a long trip. So we were traveling to Australia, and I'd already played all the games I could play and read all the books my mom brought for me, and my parents were both asleep on the plane at the time. And I remember my dad's wallet was sticking out of his pocket. And I thought this is a great time to just thumb through his wallet because we've got about 12 hours left still on this flight. And so there I was, about 14 years old on this flight, took his wallet, began thumbing through it. I got to his driver's license. And when I looked at his driver's license, I saw the year 1916 on his birthday. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, that is not the age I thought my dad was. And I was told a different age. And there we are, not a great time to find out that there is a different age and there is a lie being told to you when you're, 37,000 feet in the air over the seas. And I remember waking my parents up, and it became a huge thing on the flight of, why did you do this? And why did you tell me the truth? And they began to tell me that they didn't want me to worry, that my dad was older and going to pass away and all these things. And I thought, well, now, too bad that box has been opened. And I learned in that moment that my mom and dad were almost 38 years apart in age. And so that'll take us back to, growing up in that household. And again, we went to church and they served in church and they took me to Christian school. But at a very early age, about I would say I was between, I know I get it wrong sometimes. I feel like I was between 9 and 10 years old. My dad loved the restaurant Bob Evans, and he would take me to Bob Evans sometimes. And my dad was so much older that, the more I found out about him, he had served in wars, and he served in World War II. And I would hear about my dad's stories all the time. He loved to tell me all his stories, and I understand that they were not appropriate stories for a young child. But he would just love to tell me stories and all the bombs that were going off around him, all this stuff, and tell me all the narration of what was happening in the wars. But I remember one time specifically, he took me out to a restaurant at Bob Evans, his favorite place, and he began to set pictures out in front of me. I mean, I'm a little girl, and he began to set out all these pictures in front of me. And he said, "I want you to look at these pictures, Michelle, because I want you to know that this is going to happen to you one day when you get older, because Jesus is coming back, and he's, I think, going to come back before, in our lifetime." And I remember looking down at the pictures, not really understanding what I was seeing, but I was seeing bodies piled on top of each other, naked bodies piled on top of each other, and incinerators being opened up by hands, and the pictures of people coming out of those, and people with half their heads shot off, and children in ditches that were starved to death. And you remember I told you I was between 9 and 10 years old. And my dad put these pictures in front of me and said, "I'm asking you to not get married. I'm asking you to not have children. And I'm going to tell you this till you're an adult, because this is what's going to happen. It's going to happen again." Talk about wrong narration to start with a little girl. Now, listen, again, I love my dad, and I miss him so much. And I know he was broken of all the things he went through, but that started my journey, being a friend to fear. And as I grew up, because my dad's trauma was getting worse and worse and worse, and as he was getting older, there was so much verbal abuse in my home, so much verbal abuse. And, I didn't have brothers or sisters to go hide or play with during that time. So my job became to be the advocate for my mom and run in the rooms and get between them when they were fighting, and get between them when he was throwing her into the wall in the shower, and getting in between them when he would get up in the morning. And the way he would wake my mom up is to stand over her and pour an ice bucket over her head to wake her up. And that was my journey as a little girl, is partnering with fear, partnering with a narration that was never supposed to be told to me, partnering with this vision of, you've got to be the protector of the family. And that went on for years and years. The verbal abuse got so much worse whenever we would go out to eat or go anywhere. I mean, there was just so much fear in me that it became and manifested in different ways that I realize now and understand the more I've dealt with my own mental state, and dealing with others and counseling others. Is like, we'd be at restaurants, my dad would just begin to verbally abuse my mom to the waiter. Like, isn't she is so stupid? She's such a whore. Like, I mean, he would use these words in front of me. And I remember the more we would go out, because we went out to eat all the time, is thinking that there was going to be somebody coming in and shooting up the restaurant. Like, all these weird fears started in my life, to where my mom had to start taking me to a psychiatrist. I think by the time I was probably about 11 years old. And just crazy stuff. And through that, when we came back from Australia, and that time I found out about their age, they sat me down as well, about 14 years old, and said, "Hey, Michelle, we want to let you know that we're going to get a divorce. We're going to wait till you're 18 though, but because we want you to be an adult when we do that, but we're going to do this. And we are not really wanting to be together, but we'll stay in the house together for you till you're 18. So at 14 years old, my parents moved into separate rooms, lived their complete separate lives. And at that time, my dad started showing signs of dementia. And just being, at that age, 14, those shaping years of going into high school and all those things, all my life's mission at that point, at 14 years old, was I've got to keep them together. So whether that's doing something good to get their attention, or whether that's doing something bad to get their attention, knowing my dad was so old, and was I going to have to be the one to take care of him, and then him showing signs of dementia and all these things starting, it just rampantly started this crazy journey of thought processes and weird fears and just out of the box OCD issues that at the time nobody knew what that was. I mean, we've got those words covered now. We all know what that means. We use that as, you meet somebody, well, I have this, or, it's like their middle name. Back then, I didn't hear those words. I didn't understand what those words meant. I had not heard what that was. No one could explain to me what that was. And so my life started to change, the trajectory of my life. So I started using as fuel, doing bad things to try and get their attention, staying out, seeking out, doing this, party scene, going 2 hours away at a club at 3 a.m. and seeking out, all the things that still to this day, my mom's like, you did that. But I remember one specific time that I think was just kind of the nail in the coffin for my mental state was going to some friends' houses and experimenting with some, drugs and alcohol and things like that. And getting in the car and driving after that with a friend that I had. And I remember driving, and all of a sudden just the world seemed to change and spin. And I started to hallucinate as I was driving. And I pulled over into a parking lot. And I began to weep to my friend and said, something's wrong with me. I think I need to go to the hospital. And she looked at me and began to laugh and said, no, it's because we laced what you took. And I remember getting driven to her house and being put in like a little closet room, and I'm bawling and begging them to take me to the hospital. I mean, I felt like I was fading into the darkness. And they said, we'll take you out once you come off of this. And screaming and kicking the door and asking someone to please take me to the hospital. And, after I came out of that, I was never the same. And here all of these things built up. And why I'm telling you this is because I'm telling you this as we journey together in the many days and many episodes ahead of being under the wrong influence, being under the wrong narration. I tell people all the time, the battles that we're seeing being fought out here is because the battles that were lost in here. And I slowly, definitely began to lose the battle. And though my parents loved Jesus and they told me about Jesus, because they definitely told me all the time he was coming back and all the things we were going to endure, there was a different kind of narration I was listening to, because even though they were serving in the church, like I said, I was seeing a totally different look of what I thought the church was behind the scenes. And so I remember very vividly spending the night at a friend's house and waking up in the middle of the night, and I really thought I was dying. And so I went into my friend's mom's room and I said, I need to go to the hospital. I need you to take me to the hospital. Thank God she was a nurse at the time. And she did end up taking me to the hospital. And I'd never felt anything like what I was feeling. And no one could explain to me what I was feeling. And stayed in the hospital that night. And they released me because there was nothing physically wrong with me. And I remember after that, it was about a week or two of almost nightly visits to the emergency room with the same feeling, till finally the doctors looked at my parents and said, you have her at the wrong hospital. And so that began my journey with, being in the wrong hospital and not understanding what was happening and not having anybody to talk to, because at the time, no one understood the spiritual warfare. No one understood what the word agoraphobia was. No one understood what true OCD, panic disorder, and true psychosis was. I mean, my friends at the time, no one knew the word anxiety. So they called me Psycho Michelle. That was like my nickname. And lost everybody in my life until a series of events of never coming out of the flight state. You hear about fight or flight, to where I was confined to my room to almost 8 months in my home. And the journey, I don't remember a lot about it except thinking every day I was going to die. And I remember I couldn't even eat. I had to take my food that my parents would give me and ask them to eat it. How selfish of me to see if they were going to die, because I had such an awful OCD from the things that happened to me being laced, that even to eat food was a chore. So I would have them eat the food. I'd have them come back to me in a half an hour to see if they were having any symptoms. And then I would eat my food, which then turned into an eating disorder as well. So being locked in, confined from all civilization when you are, about 18 years old. I was a dancer at the time, and I was on to be a professional dancer at the time. And that gift, not getting to do that anymore, not having the friendships, and being in a state of psychosis. When you were saved at this really early age, I was saved at 8 years old. I gave my life to Jesus. I was baptized. Right after that, I fell deeply in love with him, even at that age, and would go on my recess time and basically do the Easter story with sticks and leaves for all my friends instead of going and playing. Here's that girl that when the narration took hold, the wrong influence took hold, she's locked inside of her room. And too long of a story to tell about the series of events, but it came to where one night I lined up some medication. I didn't even know where I got all the medication. I really can't remember too much about that. And I remember going out to the kitchen, which was a chore in and of itself. And I remember grabbing a Hi-C bottle that had a Ghostbusters logo on it and coming down and going, I'm going to take each one of these for every reason I shouldn't be alive anymore. And I don't know what really happened, because I wasn't feeling the presence of God in my room, obviously, and no one was coming in to pray over me and rebuke what the enemy was trying to do in my life. But I remember feeling and hearing him say in that moment that there was every reason I wanted to die, was every reason he had for me to live. And in that moment, I remember I was thinking, am I going to have a miracle? Like, is everything going to change from that moment? And the only thing I knew that I needed to change was my decision and how I was thinking. And I didn't know how I was going to do that at the time. I mean, I couldn't really walk out to the kitchen without passing out. And so in that moment, I don't remember all the details, but I remember I made a decision back in my room that I was going to partner with him because I needed my life to mean something. And I knew in that moment that he had something for me and that it wasn't going to be taken away in an incident, and that me and him were going to go on a journey together of the next right yes, and to do things afraid. And I remember beginning to go to the door of my house on Monarch Circle. And I remember going to the outside of the door. And those were not easy moments. I think people think, oh, you got to the door, you got to the car. No, I would pass out. I would throw up. They'd have to drag me back in the house. Like, this was a series of days and weeks to do the next right yes, to partner with him, to say my life means something because you want to make an impact with me. And I remember getting in the car. My mom would just drive me around the neighborhood, and I'd be on the floor of the passenger seat, just sweating profusely, shaking, vomiting. And I was like, let's just do it again. And then I remember it was out of the neighborhood. And I remember it was to the mall. And then I remember the next week would be trying to walk to the middle of the mall, passing out, everything be spinning. But it was through a series of events that God took my hand to lead me away under his influence to change my life forever. And some things left immediately, some things I was dealing with addiction, some things I was dealing with eating disorder, some things left immediately, but some things took partnership and time. And I'm so glad he took me through that process. And so through that process, Michelle Lamping at the time became Michelle Brogan. And Michelle Brogan was called into full-time ministry. And Michelle Brogan began to do the things she could never do before. I mean, simple things like getting on an elevator, simple things like driving a car more than an hour, simple things like getting up on a stage, simple things like flying in a plane it's just incredible, the transformation, but the process took time. And I watched a movie. I know most of you know this movie called Back to the Future. I remember watching it years later after I had come out of that process of my life and began to see total transformation and healing, gave God my full yes, not just my life, but my dreams, my destiny, my family, everything. And that's when everything changed for me. But I remember watching Back to the Future. I don't know if you remember about that movie. It was such an interesting concept to me that for the car to go to the future, they had to put trash in the car. The trash is what made the car go, and the car will go to the future, right? And I felt like the Lord spoke to me in that moment. Like, you thought this was all trash, all this horrible thing that you would walk through and went through, but I'm going to make it treasure, and it's going to fuel you to the future. And the future is where you're going to be a different girl. And the future is where you're going to see people's lives transform from your story based on what I'm doing with your testimony. And coming out of those times was hard. My dad, after that, they ended up getting a divorce. My dad did end up having Alzheimer's, and I watched him in several nursing homes. When you're 18 years old and you're watching all that, and the things that the man that once was the most rough and very abusive became the softest human, and watching all that, and it hasn't been an easy road, but it's been a reward. And I think sometimes one of my statements I love to live off of is the risk will never outweigh the reward. And it was risky coming out of that time. My resume was, this girl is nuts. This girl is crazy. This girl's not, I don't even know how I graduated high school, the life that I lived, the person that I was. The resume should have been stamped reject, but God saw the availability of my heart and that I wanted to give him my all, surrender my yes to him. And so all that testimony, all those times of dark places, all that time that I didn't think I was ever going to leave that room, I'm now traveling the world, being able to use that story to see other people be delivered. And I think I'm talking to some people out there that feel like maybe that's you, feeling isolated, maybe being under the wrong narrative or under the wrong influence. And God is going to use your story. You just have to give him the glory, and you have to give him your yes. And I sometimes say, give him your yes and he'll do the rest. And that is, to me, truth. Even though I have to partner with him in everything, I give up the control and allow him to do what he's going to do and submit my will to him. I think we forget sometimes that when Jesus came to the earth, he didn't come down in the white robe and walk around with the white robe of glory. No, he came down and zipped himself up in humanity so that we would know that he experienced everything we experience. I think sometimes we know he's sinless, but he still felt anger when he turned over the tables. He still felt grief when he saw his friend Lazarus die. He still sweat blood in the Garden of Gethsemane from that stress in that moment, knowing he was going to take on something that in that moment he said, if there's any other way. But what he always did was submit his will to God. And so for you, I want to free you too, thinking if you're still feeling that temptation or still feeling that anger or still feeling that fear, and to think I don't ever feel that fear anymore, to think I've not walked away after all those years at 51 years old now, never having a panic attack, never feeling fear, not going through some seasons where some of that residue tried to come back in and some of that temptation to listen to the wrong narrative. I mean, I've been tempted so many times, but my narration now, I understand who I'm under the influence of. And Jesus knew exactly. He is the influence, but who he was under the influence of, and he says it several times in scripture, was his father, because he was about his father's business. So when those emotions came, I mean, in humanity, you can't get rid of emotions, y'all. Like, we are emotional beings, but it's that we don't make decisions all the time off of those emotions. And I have failed at times with that, with the fear, because that is one of those things with me that I dealt with, right? I might not deal with other things that other people are dealing with or different addictions, but for me, it's giving into the temptation and the narration of fear. Mostly that I'm going to die or I won't be in control of this situation. And some of you don't even deal with that, but you deal with other things. But that's where we've got to understand in these episodes ahead of what we're under the influence of. And I believe that God wants to heal. He wants to set people free. Again, the things I'm doing right now, I never in my wildest dreams that girl sitting in her room staring at those pink walls with old Holly Hobby curtains would never think she would have the life she has now. She would never have dreamt of the people that she would meet and the adventures she would go on, letting the Lord be the captain of her ship. And I pray today that for you, that's going to be the same thing you do, is let him steer, let him be in control. When we want control, that's where so many of those emotions come in and take over and the wrong narratives start setting in motion. And we partner and we hold hands with fear and we let that fear walk with us everywhere we go. We let that anger walk with us everywhere we go. And the only hand we should be holding is his. And he'll walk us through when we go through things. I know some of you are smack dab in the middle of a storm right now, but let him be the one to walk you through it. It does not, when we give our lives to Jesus, this does not negate everything that's going to happen. That's why I like to see myself on a ship with him and him being the captain, because the storms have come, the ship has rocked, the sharks have circled, but I know he's the one that I'm letting navigate and lead. So I know we're going to get through the storm. So I pray today that this has touched you. This has helped you. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about my life and how God's changed it, how God's radically changed it, and how when you give him your yes, that things will start to look a little different. And not only will you be under the influence, but you will have true influence for the kingdom, for others, to see them meet the one true God. Hope this helped. Love you guys, and I hope you have an amazing day.